Okay, here we go today. I've brought my notes because we have a great question from a viewer. Why does the mind loop? To understand why the mind loops, we first have to understand the nature of the mind and the nature of the ego. One of the things the mind does so well is to quickly take information and put it over in a file folder. It does that every day, and often we don't think about how that information is filed. It goes over there quickly, and that information is filed, and then once the information is filed, it refers to the ego. The ego picks it up and says, this is interesting information for me to digest. So the mind and the ego work very closely together. The mind and the sense of individual identity, of self-image. They're working like BFFs. With this as our understanding, we ask, why do thoughts loop? Not every thought loops. Some thoughts loop for a little bit. Some thoughts loop for a long time. Why does that happen? One of the top reasons that thoughts loop, and most of us on this channel will understand this, is that we didn't receive adequate validation. We didn't feel understood or heard. When we have thoughts or ideas to share and someone speaks over us or dominates us, we're left feeling diminished. So the mind takes that information, puts it in a file folder, said that wasn't a good conversation, I feel diminished. And the ego picks up on that and says, that was really hurtful. Something's wrong with that. I don't like that. Then we sit with a diminished ego and the thoughts moving back and forth, round and round in a circle. A second reason thoughts can loop, well, it takes off from the first reason. When we don't feel that we have adequate voice, when we don't feel comfortable sharing our feelings, sharing ideas, sharing our thoughts, when we have spent so much time alone with our feelings, well, who else do we have to talk to? Because it's not safe in the world, doesn't feel safe in the world to share our feelings, to share our ideas. We'll often sit with ourselves and mull over thoughts or ideas or concepts that don't have an outlet. We become so accustomed to sitting with ourselves, to sitting with our thoughts, that it feels like our default mode. My thoughts just loop, and I don't have an outlet for them. For the third reason thoughts can loop, I'll provide a specific example. Let's say you're standing in a line with your friend. Your friend feels pretty good about themselves. They're comfortable in their skin. And you have an inner sense of unworthiness or not quite being good enough. Your friend goes through the line, and then it's time for you to go through the line. And you pick up on something with a customer service person, just a little glance. Our wounds can jumpstart a loop. So that loop won't start for your friend. They feel pretty good about themselves. But you might feel unworthy or unlovable, and that's jump-started in that moment, in the line. And then it stays with you the rest of the day because it's rubbed up against a wound of not feeling good enough. It's not the customer service person. It's just the wound and the mind that started looping around that wound. The ego then picks up on that and is reinforced in the looping. See, you're not worthy. The mind will also loop around injustice. Now there's two types of injustice. There's egoic injustice that will feel very righteous. Oh, I'm going to show him or her. It's kind of like one day I oughta. That's the egoic type of looping. The other type of looping I call divine justice. When we see an injustice in the world, where there's an inequality with great wealth and poverty, when the child down the street isn't fed, when we see an epidemic of homelessness, these are divine, deeper injustices. And something inside doesn't let us settle. It won't let us settle. In this case, perhaps you're moved to action, be involved in a volunteer project or in social action, in organizations, nonprofit organizations, in service in some way. In this type of looping, we dive deep. Something's informing us. We can't quite rest at night until we know that child down the street is fed. This leads to my final reason today that the mind loops. The mind will loop to either establish self-identity, meaning ego, to reinforce self-identity, or to refine ego, to evolve ego. Each will have a unique flavor. In the first looping of establishing self-identity, it will be exhilarating to find your voice. I spoke in that meeting, what an accomplishment. So there's an exhilaration with the establishment of self-identity when one has experienced trauma. The second type, in terms of ego, the reinforcement of the ego, will feel vindicated. Yes, I was right all along. I knew it all along. And the third type of evolving the ego, refining our identity, our individual identity, that will start to feel exhausting. I can see how thoughts and opinions and these beliefs going back and forth like a cacophony, they're ultimately going to go nowhere. And this is using the looping, it's using it like compost to open to something more, a refined way of being with ego. It's the evolution of ego. For those of us who've experienced trauma, it's so important that we establish the ego, that we reinforce the ego, and also then finally refine or evolve the ego. The looping there will slowly start to lose its momentum and power. It will slowly start to wear itself out because the mind and the ego, they're not in that power duo anymore. The isness or essence of who we are shines through and steadily dissolves that tight, bonded relationship with mind and ego. It steadily starts to disassemble that relationship. So we're not as invested in the looping any longer. I hope this video is super helpful for you. I hope it evoked some deep wisdom that's already inside of you. I love to receive your questions and comments. And if you enjoyed this video, please do share. Please do like. And I'll be back on the channel very soon.